The morning mist hovered low over the Zhang River, wrapping the village in a pale, quiet shroud. That calm was shattered in an instant by a cruel act that no one could have imagined. Casimu, a man whose heart had hardened beyond recognition, looked down at his newborn son with a cold, empty gaze. "I don't want this burden in my life," he whispered, as if speaking aloud could erase the tiny life he held. Without hesitation, he placed the baby into a small, fragile basket and set it adrift on the river, hoping the current would carry away his responsibility forever. But life has a way of weaving miracles where despair seems absolute. The river, tangled with roots and hanging branches, became a stage for redemption. A farmer named Ole, making his early rounds along the bank, noticed the floating basket. His heart skipped as he saw it carried by the current, vulnerable and alone. Without a second thought, he dove into the cold, rushing water. It cut across his skin like knives, a sharp reminder of abandonment and fear. Yet he did not hesitate. His hands plunged into the muddy depths, guided not by sight, but by the faint, insistent sound of life, a cry barely audible over the river's roar. Amid the mud, thorns, and decaying leaves, he found it, a tiny, soaked bundle trapped between two thick roots. The basket floated sideways, partially submerged, camouflaged by branches and detritus. Ole gripped it tightly, pulling it close to his chest. He shouted the name of God, not as a prayer but as a plea for life itself. Inside, the baby's fists were clenched, eyes closed, trembling as though the world had already challenged him before he had taken his first breath. With shaking hands, Ole lifted the boy toward the gray dawn sky and whispered, "You will not die without knowing what love is." The words were heavy with promise, the kind of promise the universe tests with a price. The sun's first rays began to chase away the shadows of night as Ole trudged along the muddy path back home. Roosters crowed across the village, but no one saw him pass. Only the ancestors watched, and Aminata felt the shift in the air. She was standing at the kitchen door, hands dusted with cornmeal from preparing the day's first meal, when she saw her husband appear, soaked, eyes glimmering, carrying a trembling bundle. My God in heaven. "What is that, Ole?" she asked, running to meet him. "It's a baby, Aminata," he said, voice trembling. "An innocent life the world tried to erase, but the river did not take him, and neither will we." Tears streamed down her face, hot and uncontainable. She did not ask whose child it was. She did not question the reasons, and she did not speak of judgment. She only took him into her arms, feeling the fragile warmth, and cried with a mix of grief, relief, and wonder. Not long ago, her own womb had known only silence, mourning a child who had never drawn a breath. Now, a new life rested in her hands, as if the heavens had said, "It's not over yet." Inside their modest home, Ole laid the baby on a straw mat near the fire. Aminata prepared a warm bath, her hands moving with gentle precision. She reached for clean cloths, pressed and scented with eucalyptus charcoal, as her grandmother had taught. The boy cried softly, wary of a world that had already shown cruelty, but Aminata held him close, pressing her forehead to his. "You didn't come from my womb, but you fell straight into my heart," she whispered, voice breaking. From that day forward, no one called him the river baby. He was simply their boy. Though the world outside slept, time inside that small house had already begun anew. What had been discarded as a burden was now embraced as a blessing. They had no wealth, no elaborate plans, only open hearts, willing hands, and unwavering faith. The days that followed in the village seemed ordinary. Garden beds watered, children running to school, women braiding hair on porches. Yet in Ole and Aminata's home, each act became ritual. Baths with fragrant, leaves, porridge sweetened with milk from the oldest goat, songs sung in Yoruba with the rising sun, all became offerings of love and care. The boy still had no name, but Ole knew the right one would come at the right time, a name worthy of his journey. From the first moment he had seen the boy trapped between the roots, a voice whispered in his heart, "Ow!" Unexpected joy. He kept the name secret until the moment was right. Meanwhile, Kasimu lived as if nothing had happened. Back in the city, his life was a series of empty deals, fleeting pleasures, and hollow promises. He never spoke of the child again, believing the river had settled the matter. But destiny, that relentless storyteller, had other plans. What is thrown away with contempt sometimes returns as honor. Ole could not foresee the future. He only knew that this boy would live, and as long as he had strength, he would shield him from the cruelty of the world. In that small house of clay and faith, a story began not of blood, but of courage, choice, and unconditional love. Aminata, who had always been a healer, now applied that gift to her own heart. Since childhood, she had welcomed women with cramps, children with fevers, and elders with restless nights. She brewed teas with faith, teaching that healing came not only from roots and leaves, but from intention. Yet her own sorrow had remained untouched. Months before the river rescue, she had lost a child, a boy she had longed for and already named, a child whose birth she had prepared for with meticulous care. Life, however, had cut her dreams short. A sudden fever, unexpected bleeding, silence in the womb, the celebration she had imagined turned to mourning. She did not scream or rebel. She buried her hopes and walked through the days searching for something she knew she would not find. Ole understood. He offered warmth in her bath, sweetness in her meals, and longer embraces, silent acts of love. So when she saw him that morning, soaked and carrying the basket, something inside her shivered, sensing that the universe had returned what time had stolen. When he pulled away the cloth to reveal the baby's face, Aminata dropped to her knees, not in despair, but in surrender. She touched his tiny feet, cold yet alive, pressed her face to his chest, and felt the steady, resilient heartbeat. "My God, he's really alive," she murmured. "He is, and he's ours. Not by blood, but by choice," Ole said, voice tight with emotion. She asked no questions, no explanations, no origins, no judgment. She only asked for warm water, clean cloths, and space to nurture. The maternal instinct, long dormant, was reborn by the firelight and straw mat. That night, while Ole slept outside on the bench, Aminata stayed awake, watching every breath, every twitch, every sound. She rose whenever silence lingered too long, checking his chest, whispering prayers in the dark. When he cried from hunger for the first time, she laughed. A deep, joyful sound, the laughter of someone who had been reborn. She prepared thin corn porridge, mashed banana, and fed him with a wooden spoon. The boy suckled slowly, eyes half open, testing the world cautiously, before falling asleep wrapped in cloths scented with orange leaves. In the days that followed, Aminata transformed the house. She washed old linens at the river stones, hung them to dry with pride, sewed new diapers, made ash soap for the baby's clothes, and replanted hibiscus bushes along the porch. The neighbors noticed and whispered, "Wasn't she the one who lost a baby recently? Where did that boy come from?" But no one dared ask directly. There was a sacredness to it, a woman who had known grief learning to love again. And everyone in Kembe knew, when a woman lost finds joy again in a child, it is better to honor the mystery than to demand answers. Only the village healer, Old Defense, entered the house without asking. Beads clinking softly around her neck, she looked, the baby in the eye and declared, "This child is not ordinary. He has a strong spirit. He was saved by chosen hands." Aminata, eyes lowered, replied, "I don't know if it was God or the river or the pain, but he arrived, and I won't let him go." If nodded and promised to keep silent, and she did. She never told anyone where the boy had come from, but in her nighttime prayers, she always lit one extra candle for a small soul and a big heart. Time passed quickly inside that house. Each day was a victory. The boy gained weight, color, and began to smile earlier than expected. It was as if he knew that he had almost never had the right to exist. And because of that, he smiled with his soul. Aminata carried him wrapped in cloth across her back, washed clothes with him on her hip, sang to him with a voice that had once only known silence. And one night, while putting him to sleep, she whispered in his ear, "You didn't come from me, but you entered where no one else ever could, my emptiness." And she kept watching him sleep, because in that light slumber there was peace, and in that peace there was healing. Life would still have many secrets to reveal. Boot in that clay house, two pains, one ancient, one newly born, had met, and they chose to walk together. The days began piling up like dry leaves in the yard, and the boy, once just a fragile breath of life, became a presence. He grew like weeds after the rain, fast, unexpected, and full of strength. Aminata called him Io, even though the name had not yet been officially registered. She said it was because every morning when he woke up and smiled with still sleepy eyes, her heart remembered that life sometimes also surprises us with joy. The clay house that once held silence now breathed sound. Ao's laughter echoed through the walls like birdsong at dawn. He asked questions no book could teach you how to answer. Does the sky have an end? Why do ants walk in a line? Does there ever water remember me? Aminata answered with stories. Ole answered with proverbs, and sometimes they just smiled, pretending to know because some questions only time could answer. Ao talked to the chickens, spoke to the old farm goat like they were brothers from another life. When it rained, he would run barefoot, arms wide open as if he wanted to embrace the entire sky. Aminata started wearing colorful fabrics again. She redid her braids, went back to singing while cooking. She made sweet corn porridge in the morning, yam fritters in the afternoon and at night. She sat with Io in her lap and told him stories from her grandmother's time. Always a man of few words, now laughed more. He worked the fields with renewed energy. He even started planting flowers around the house. He said Ao deserved to grow up surrounded by beauty, even if he didn't yet understand the world. Ao was curious. He was always watching the adults, trying to learn everything they did. One day, he secretly took Ole's machete to help cut firewood. He almost lost his fingers. There was panic, tears, and one of those big scares. But that night, when he saw the bandage Aminata had wrapped with such patience, he whispered, "You really are my mom, aren't you?" And she, eyes full of tears, simply replied, "I am my son, and I always will be." The village started to notice till the children began playing with him in the fields. Neighbors once quiet now greeted the couple with warmth. They said the boy had something different in his eyes, that even though he was small, he already carried a grown Urson's wisdom. "It's like he sees beyond," said old Mabanori once, watching Ao stack stones by the roadside as if building something invisible. The years passed with the rhythm of the seasons. Every birthday was celebrated with corn cake dancing in the yard and a prayer beneath the old mango tree. No one asked where he came from. No one dared touch that past. The official story was simple. Ole and Aminata had a son, a gift from God given when they least expected it, and no one dared question it. But there were nights when Ao stared at the sky for too long. He'd sit at the edge of the yard, eyes silently fixed on the horizon, and he would ask, "Why don't I look like you too?" Aminata swallowed hard. Ole changed the subject, and silence settled slowly like dust. But then came a warm touch, a fresh loaf of bread, a story told in soft light, and the boy would forget, at least for a little while. Once during a harvest celebration, Ao danced in the center of the circle with a wide smile. The clapping set the rhythm. The drums filled the night, and Aminata's eyes sparkled. That was when a neighbor said to her, "This boy has a star. Whoever raised him will be remembered with honor." Aminata smiled. But inside Atear burned because she knew that light had cost a lot. It had come from abandonment, from fear, from the edge of the end. But she also knew all light that rises from the bottom of the river shines differently. As time passed, Ao began helping on the farm. He learned to dig, to plant, to respect the timing of seeds. Ole taught with patience, shared secrets of the land stories from when he was a boy. And every time the sun began to set, they returned home. Together, hoe on their shoulders, peace in their hearts. One afternoon, already 8 years old, Ao asked, "Dad, if I had come from somewhere else, would you still call me your son?" Ole stopped, looked at him, and replied, "I call you son because that's what you are, and nothing will change that. Not time, not blood, not the river." Ao smiled, squeezed the old man's hand tighter, and kept walking without knowing it. He had just sealed a bond that not even the truth when it came would be able to break. Dot in that simple house, where pain had once made its nest. Now joy was the one whole lived, and Ao, the boy rescued from the waters, was the flame that lit everything. He didn't know it yet, but this story, the real one, was still waiting to be told. But for now, he lived. And that, for someone who had nearly never been born, was miracle enough. Time, that old storyteller who never rushes his chapters, had taken nearly 10 years since that dawn by the river. Ao was now almost a young man. His feet no longer fit the shoes Aminata had sewn, and his eyes, oh, those eyes, carried a mixture of tenderness and depth that even the elders couldn't explain. He walked through the village with the lightness of someone who had been saved and the firmness of someone who carried a purpose he didn't yet understand. But the quiet routines of the village of Kembe were broken one dry afternoon at the end of the season. Dust rose from the main road as a white horse appeared, gleaming like vanity on market day. On it rode a man in fine clothes, polished boots, and a well-practiced smile. Behind him came a cart full of goods, and a few helpers shouting as if the world needed to stop and notice them. It was Chinu changed. Yes, a well-trimmed beard, gold teeth, and overpowering perfume. But the eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, always searching for something to use. The village, used to humble folks, was torn between curiosity and suspicion. Some said he had made a fortune in the big city, selling fine fabrics, spices, and perfumes. Others, more observant, whispered that his money came from shady business, dark partnerships, and soulless deals. He says he wants to invest in the village, said the community leader during a meeting in the square. Maybe open a trading post, even a school. And why now? Asked Defunatante the healer. Her eyes half closed, he said he wants to give back to his roots, but didn't say much more. Kasimu settled into one of the abandoned houses on the hill, and soon became the talk of every gathering. He offered help, donated Risetto some families, bought rounds of drinks during celebrations. But there was something forced about his gestures, something that felt more like a debt than generosity. And it was one market morning, as a minister sold corn fritters by the chapel corner, that Kosimu's eyes met Ao's. Just a moment. A second that froze time. Dot Kazimu, who until then had been flashing smiles like coins, stopped walking. His face stiffened. His hands trembled. Ao, on the other hand, felt a shiver down his spine, as if his body recognized something his mind didn't yet know how to name. "Who is that boy?" Kasimu asked one of the villagers, pointing discreetly. "That's Ole and Aminata's son." The man replied, not noticing the unease in the stranger's eyes. But Kasimu knew, or rather felt, something in the boy's manner, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his chin. It was as if the past, the own he thought he'd buried on that cowardly night, had come back to life and now walked freely through the streets. Full of dignity, he tried to play it cool, continued his visit, shook hands, praised a local corn, smiled at the elders, but inside his blood boiled, not with anger, with fear. Fear that the mistake he had thrown into the river had come back to haunt him, not with shouting or revenge, but with presence. Ao, meanwhile, was restless. That night he told Aminata about the man on the white horse. Said he felt something strange, as if he'd been seen from the inside out. Searched by an ancient gaze, Aminata fell silent. She set the pot aside, sat next to her son, and ran her hand through his hair. "The world is full of eyes, my son, but not all of them deserve to be looked back at." Ole heard about Kasamu's return the next day. He was in the fields when a neighbor told him. The hoe nearly slipped from his hands, not out of fear, but from held-back rage, from memories that returned like blades. But he took a deep breath, washed his face in the well, and went back to work. Let him stay up there on the hill. In this house, only those with clean souls are welcome. The village, however, was not blind. Gradually, they began to notice the tension, the way Kasimu watched Ao from afar. How he got close to those near the boy as if trying to build a bridge over the abyss he himself had dug. But there are things even gold can't buy. And the silence of an old mistake when it starts making noise doesn't go quietly. If and upon crossing paths with Kasimu at the market simply said, "Some rivers swallow, but some rivers return," he didn't answer. He just lowered his eyes. And that night, for the first time in a long while, Kasimu dreamed of dark waters, and in the middle of the water, a basket inside it, eyes looking at him, not with fear, but with judgment. His return to the village would still bring many chapters, but the first had already been written. The past he had tried to drown had returned, and this time it knew how to swim. It didn't take long for the days of peace in Ole and Aminata's home to start clouding over like a sky before a storm. It began with small signs. Ao used to wake before the sun with shining eyes started sleeping too much. Then came the chills. Sometimes in the middle of a bath he would curl up saying he felt cold inside his bones. Other times he woke up in the night screaming, his whole body drenched in sweat, hands pressed tightly to his chest. The water is pulling me again." He would cry wide-eyed, like someone reliving a drowning they don't even remember. Desperate Aminata tried to calm him with warm cloths, whispered prayers, and old blessings taught by her grandmother. Ole, meanwhile, would light the oil lamp, sit at the edge of the mat, and stay there, watching the boy tremble in fear, helpless. It was as if the past, the one they had buried so carefully, had returned thirsty for answers. During the day, Ao seemed normal. He ran, laughed, helped in the fields. But at night he seemed to carry another soul. The cough came like a storm, harsh, dry, relentless. It wasn't a common illness. There was no phlegm, no constant fever. It was a soul-deep cough, as if his body were trying to expel something that didn't belong to it. Aminata took him to the healer, if on sittin' the old woman who had seen. More hidden sins than there were leaves on the village floor, observed the boy carefully. She passed leaves over his head, sang ancient chants, and finally rested her forehead on his. She stayed silent for a long time. Then she arose, looked at Ole and Aminata with tired but certain eyes, and said, "This is not of the body, it's of the spirit. This boy carries a fear that isn't his. It's like he was born Ina Fright. There are memories asleep inside him, but they're starting to wake up. So what do we do if on setting asked Aminata, voice heavy with emotion? Someone needs to tell him the truth before the pain grows with the body. Those words echoed through the house. Ol and Aminata knew exactly what they meant. They knew the time of silence might be over. But how to say it? How to look into the eyes of a boy who calls them father and mother and tell him he was thrown away like trash? How to explain that the world tried to kill him before he even had a name? He's our son. We don't need to say anything, Ol whispered one night during a moment of peace between coughing fits. But he's also a son of truth. Ole and the truth is knocking inside him. That same night, Ao had another nightmare. He woke up screaming, but this time he didn't call for help. He slipped quietly from Themat barefoot and went out into the yard. He sat at the edge of the corn bed and stared at the sky. When Aminata found him there, he was silent, eyes puffy. "Mama," he began, his voice tight, "why do I keep dreaming about a basket in the water?" She froze. Her heart nearly jumped from her chest. She sat beside him, saying nothing. Then she took his hand, squeezed it gently, and answered, "Maybe, because water, even when it seems to take, can also give back." Ao didn't press further. He laid his head in her lap and stayed there, listening to the heartbeat of the woman who had always welcomed him. But inside, something was already changing, something subtle but deep. A doubt beginning to take root, a question wanting to be asked, but not yet knowing its name. The days that followed were shadowed. Ao kept more to be himself, avoided talking about his dreams, has started wetting the bed again on some nights. During lessons with the village elders, his mind wandered easily, and when asked what was wrong, he only said, "I don't know. I just feel like something's not right." Aminata closed herself off. She cried alone in the kitchen, kneading flour harder than necessary. Ol buried himself in farm work, working more than he needed. It was as if everyone in the house were trying to escape a river that, though invisible, still ran through their home if unset and returned uninvited. She sat on the doorstep and watched the boy play alone with a stick. Then she said, "Silence is the father of many ghosts, and sometimes the one we want to protect. Dot is the one who most needs the truth." Ole swallowed hard. Aminata looked at the boy and whispered, "He didn't come from my belly, but the love I feel for him no longer fits in my chest. And if telling him the truth tears that away, it won't." If unsaid replied, "It'll plant deeper roots. Because those who know where they came from also understand better where they're going." And on that day, even without realizing it, a decision began to take shape in the silence of the adults. The veil covering Ao's origin was about to be lifted. But the world has its own way of revealing things, and sometimes what we try to hide with silence ends up being exposed by the whispers of others. Words, when not spoken with care, become knives, and in small villages like Kembe, where the wind carries voices from one house to another in seconds, all it takes is a spiteful whisper to turn truth into doubt and honor into suspicion. That's how it all began. A loose comment from a neighbor's lips. "They say the boy isn't their blood." Another bolder. "They say he came from the river thrown away by someone." And just like that, the fire was lit. Duao didn't know. Not yet. Booty could feel it. The children he once ran alongside through the trails now avoided touching him. Their mothers began calling them home earlier, casting quick glances and forced smiles. Even the baker on the corner who used to give him a burnt piece of bread in the late afternoon now ignored him with a coldness the boy couldn't understand. Ole saw everything, and Aminata, already bearing the weight of so many silences, began walking with her eyes lowered. The house, once full of songs and stories, now seemed to breathe in mourning. It was on a stifling afternoon that the truth shattered. into pieces. Ao was coming home from school, walking along the shortcut through the bushes when he overheard two men talking behind a fence. That one, he's the river boy, the one who was thrown away and found by old Ole. They raised him like he was theirs. But the real father is here in the village, rich, arrogant, and silent. Ao froze. The world spun. His body trembled. He didn't understand at all, but he understood enough for his soul to plummet. He ran like someone fleeing from their own name. He reached home with dirty feet, a flushed face, and went straight to his room. Ola. Seeing the scene knew something had happened. He tried to speak to the boy, but Ao locked himself in silence. Aminata cried in the kitchen. It was as if everything they had sewn together with love was now unraveling stitch by stitch. That night, Ole made a decision. He went to the elders' gathering in the village and asked to speak. He stood before the circle with a steady voice, though his heart was in pieces. I raised Ao as my son, not because I was forced to, but because love chose me. Yes, he came from the river. Yes, he was abandoned. But the Onis who took him in were me, my wife, and the heart of our home. Silence fell. Some averted their eyes. Others sighed. But then, from one corner of the circle, a voice cut through the air. You say this now because you're jealous of the new merchant. You just want to cast a shadow over someone else's success. Ole froze. He hadn't expected that. Another man younger added, Where have you ever seen someone make up a story like this? Must be jealousy. That boy doesn't even look like you. And now you want to turn gossip into truth. Shame fell over him like cold rain. Ole clenched his fists, took a deep breath, but said nothing. He simply stood, walked silently to the door, and left. The man who had pulled a life from the bottom of the river was now being called a liar by those who'd never even learned to swim in a shallow puddle. The next day, smiles became scarce. No one waved to Ole in the fields. Some even avoided walking the road that crossed his land. They said he was spreading dangerous lies about important people, and at the center of it all was Io, a boy who never asked to be thrown away, nor to be saved, nor to carry a past now heavier than he could bear. And then the inevitable happened. Ao, hidden behind a door, overheard a conversation between two neighbors. One of them, not knowing the boy was there, said, Poor Aminata, raising somebody else's child, and still hiding from everyone that he was taken from the river. If it were me, I wouldn't even have the courage. Ao's heart shattered. He felt betrayed, filthy, abandoned. Heron crossed the road, entered the woods, ignoring thorns and branches, cutting his skin. He ended up at the edge of the same river that had once witnessed his arrival into life. He sat there, feet in the water, and cried not like a child cries. He cried like someone asking if they even have the right to exist. He cried like someone realizing the ground they stood on was built from secrets. Back home, the emptiness screamed. Louder. Aminata was searching for him, shouting his name. Ole, machete in hand, searched through the bushes. Night fell with the taste of desperation. When they found him, Ao was curled up, his face wet, not just from the river, but from the abandonment now living inside him. Why didn't you tell me? He asked without looking at either of them. Because we wanted to protect you, my son, said Aminata, kneeling beside him. But protect me from what? For myself. Silence was all that remained. In that moment, the truth was no longer a threat. It was just an open wound that needed air. But the most painful part was still to come. Because sometimes the lie isn't what's told. It's what's hidden out of love. And love, even when well-intentioned, can hurt too. The river water still slipped between Ao's toes when he stood up without saying a word. He looked straight ahead like someone who sees a world that doesn't want him. Like someone who has lost something they never even had. Behind him, sobbed, and/or lay silent, seemed to carry on his back the weight of everyone else's mistake, as if loving in silence was somehow a crime in the eyes of the people. They walked home in the dark. The trail, which so many times had been a path of hope, was now just mud and stone. The oil lamp lit on the porch cast shadows on the clay wall, and each shadow seemed to reflect all that had been left unsaid. Ao didn't want to eat, didn't want to sleep. He sat curled up on the mat, eyes fixed on the door. Aminata, exhausted, approached with a bowl of corn porridge and tried to hand it to him, but he refused with a sharp gesture. She insisted. The boy looked at her with a pain that cut deep. "Is it true? You found me in the river." The question wasn't an attack. It was a broken prayer, a plea for meaning. Aminata tried to hold on to the ball, but her hands began to tremble. Her eyes filled up, her throat closed. The porridge fell to the floor, and then, in an instant, her body gave out. She collapsed right there with a short breath and her eyes rolling back. Ao's scream was the loudest he'd ever let out. He ran to her, held her face, called her name like someone calling out for life itself. Ole rushed in, and when he saw his wife, collapsed, he let out a wail that tore through the night. He lifted Aminata into his arms and ran to the healer's house. The village awoke with the noise. Lights flicked on, doors opened. People stepped into the street with eyes full of questions and ears ready for whispers. But when they saw Aminata unconscious in Ole's arms, the gossip stopped. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of the village. Afansidin was already waiting at the door. She told everyone to be silent, took Aminata inside, and locked the door. Olai remained outside, kneeling, praying with clenched fists and forehead to the ground. Ao stood beside him, trembling. The world seemed to be collapsing because of a single question. Inside, the healer burned fennel and lavender leaves, rubbed palm oil on Aminata's wrists, and murmured ancestral songs. Time seemed to stand still. When finally Aminata opened her eyes, her first instinct was to look for Io. But he wasn't there, and the pain returned. He asked if it was true, and my heart COULDNN single quotes did take it. If uncertain with the calm of someone who's seen life come and go many times, simply held her hand and said, "You didn't sin by loving, the mistake wasn't love, it was the silence." Meanwhile, outside, Ao wandered aimlessly. He passed the square, the school, the community garden. One called out to him. No one comforted him. They only watched, some with pity, others with judgment. But what hurt the most was the silence, because he expected anger, accusations, but no one said anything, and that nothing weighed like stone. He returned to the river, the same bank, but this time there was no current, only the reflection of the moon on the water. He sat there for hours, trying to remember, trying to search his memory for any trace of that beginning, now marked by rejection. But all he found was emptiness. In the distance, he heard footsteps. It was Ole. He sat beside the boy, said nothing, just placed a hand on his shoulder. And they stayed like that. Father and son, not by blood, but by destiny, united in silence. "Is she going to be okay?" Ao asked at last. "She will." She just felt everything all at once. The fear of losing you, the guilt of staying silent, the love she's for you. Ao, it's so big it couldn't fit inside her anymore. The boy lowered his head. Ole's words didn't erase the pain, but they gave it a place to sit. The man took a deep breath and continued. "I know it hurts. I know it feels like everything was a lie, but what we lived here under this roof was real. Every hug, every bedtime story, every piece of bread we shared. It doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what the world thinks. You were chosen, not thrown away." Ao looked at him for the first time after everything. He looked with the eyes of someone still searching for shelter, and in that gaze there was a spark of trust that gossip couldn't put out, a spark that survived even among the ruins of doubt. That night, the village didn't sleep. The women closed their windows. The men avoided speaking loudly. Everyone could feel that something had changed, that the family, who had always been a symbol of unity and courage, now bled before them, and what each person would do with that blood was yet to be seen. In the dark room of the clay house, Aminata slept in silence, hands crossed over her chest. Out in the yard, Ole and Ao remained together, looking at the sky. And even if the world seemed to be falling apart, there on that porch, a bond remained, and sometimes a bond is all we need to begin again. The days that followed Aminata's fainting were filled with cautious steps, lowered eyes, and half-open doors. The villagents, so quick to speak now, fell silent before the clan faith home where Ole Aminata and Io lived. The news had already spread. Everyone knew the boy was the son of the river, and the blood father was there right there at the top of the hill, inside a new house surrounded by riches that smelled neither of sweat nor sacrifice. Kazu. His name was once again spoken with unease. Some admired him for his modern attitude. Others now looked at him sideways. He walked the streets with the same air as always, proud, perfumed, well-dressed. But the truth disturbed him, and that truth, though never spoken from his mouth, had already revealed itself. It was during a community food distribution in the village square that he tried to approach for the first time. Ao was helping carry sacks of rice, moving swiftly. When Cosimo saw him, the ground seemed to shift under his feet. It wasn't guilt, it was fear. Fear of the mirror. That boy represented a mirror that reflected abandonment. He waited for a moment when the boy was alone. He approached with a fake smile, the kind that tries to unlock closed doors with pretexts and gifts. Ao, right? I came to speak with you. Can we talk for a moment? Ao turned slowly. He looked at the man with the well-groomed face, the linen clothes, the scent of the city. A man who seemed to have everything except courage. Talk about what Cassie hesitated. The plan was to say he was sorry, that he had no choice, that he was young, pressured, lost, but none of those words left his mouth. Instead, he mumbled, "I am your father." Ao took a step back, not out of fear, but from instinct, like someone who senses a snake before the strike. He crossed his arms and replied, voice steady, "Father, whose father do you even know what it means? To be a father." Cosimo tried to smile, looked down, pulled a small bundle from his pocket, a gold watch. He placed it in the boy's hand like someone offering a beggar a coin. "Want to start over? Give you what you deserve. A good school, new clothes, a better future." Ao looked at the watch, then looked at his own hands, calloused, dark with soil, marked by a childhood lived with dignity, and said, voice trembling but firm, "If I'm your son, why did you throw me away like a stone?" Cosimo froze. The question pierced. His pride like a spear. He tried to answer, but his mouth fell silent. He tried to meet the boy's eyes, but his gaze fled. What he had so often pretended didn't exist, now stood before him in flesh, inward, in judgment. "Don't try to buy with gold what you threw into the mud," said Ao, handing the watch back. "I don't want your money. I don't want your apologies. I want to know, why would anyone do that to a baby? Why would someone throw away their own blood?" Cosimo stammered. "Sadie was young, that he was afraid, that the boy's mother insisted that he couldn't take responsibility at the time. But everything sounded small, petty, unjustifiable. You couldn't raise me, but you could let me die." That was the last line, the harshest, the truest. Cosimo tried to touch the boy's shoulder, but Ao pulled back, then turned and walked away, leaving the merchant alone in the middle of the square, surrounded by eyes that saw everything and hearts that in that moment closed to him. There was no shouting, no scene, but there was justice, because sometimes justice arrives in the silence of a child who grew up, and in that silence there is more weight than in any punishment. Cosimo returned home in silence, locked himself in, looked in the mirror, saw his own eyes, and for the first time felt ashamed of what he saw. Here remembered the river, the basket, the moment he let fate slip into the water, thinking it would set him free. But their river gave it back, returned it with strength, with honor, with soul. Door turned home, found Aminata sitting on the porch, stitching new cloths. He sat beside her in silence. Ole appeared with a gourd of fresh water. No one asked anything. No one said anything, but in that gesture, in that shared silence, there was belonging. He looked at them both, took a deep breath. And in that moment he knew blood may bring life, but love is what makes it worth living. And without saying a word, he simply laid his head on Aminata's shoulder, and there, in that quiet embrace, he found everything he had ever been looking for. It was late afternoon. The sky, painted in shades of orange and rust, reflected the dust of the road. The birds had already tucked away their songs, and the silence in the village felt heavier than usual. Ao walked slowly, his feet dragged on, the dry ground like someone carrying more than just his own body. He was going home, but the path felt longer than ever before. After the encounter with Kasimu, after the words spoken and heard, something inside him had changed. He was no longer a boy. He was the son of an answered question, an heir of pain, but also of choice. And he had learned in the hardest way that the ones who make you aren't always the ones who catch you when you fall. As he approached the house, he saw the silhouette of Ole leaning against the gate. He wasn't there by chance. It was as if he knew the boy would return at that exact moment, as if the time between father and son, when it's real, has a clock of its own. Ole said nothing. He just stood there, arms crossed, face serious, eyes steady. Ao, seeing him, stopped. They looked at each other for long seconds, each waiting for the other to speak. But in that moment, words were no longer needed. Ole opened the gate. Slowly, as someone opens, not just a wooden fence, but also a space in the heart. Ao stepped in. They looked at each other once more. Then the farmer took a step forward, opened his arms, and pulled him into an embrace. It wasn't a habitual hug. It was a rooted one. The kind that says, "You don't have to run anymore. This is your place. You were chosen, not thrown away," Ole whispered, his voice breaking. "I saw you in the river. Ow, but I didn't see a baby. I saw a miracle, and from that day on, I waited for you." The boy cried. Not a scared child's cry, but the cry of a son who finally understands who he is. He cried as if cleansing his soul, as if allowing the pain to become strength. He cried on the shoulder of the one who had taken him in, not out of duty, but out of love. Aminata appeared at the door. She was still weak, but her eyes glowed with a mix of relief and tenderness. When she saw her son in her husband's arms, she placed a hand on her chest and murmured, "Thank you, my God." He came back with a whole heart. Io approached her, knelt, and rested his head on her belly. Not because he had come from there, but because that was where his real life had begun. "Forgive me, Mama, for doubting, for running, for making you suffer." Aminata cupped his face in both hands. And replied, "You didn't make me suffer, my son. You just went looking for what you needed to hear to know who you are. And now that you know, you can be at peace." That night, there was no celebration, no announcement, but there was communion. The three of them sat at the clay table. They ate quietly, sharing more than food. They shared silence, forgiveness, and belonging. Ole told old stories from the days when he was a boy and used to fall out of trees trying to grab mangoes too soon. Aminata laughed gently. Aryu listened intently, as if wanting to hold on to every detail, as if for the first time he truly felt part of the story before going to sleep. The boy went to his room and pulled from under the mat an old piece of embroidered cloth. It was the same one that had covered his body when he was pulled from the river. It was faded, frayed at the edges, but still carried the scent of that first night of being welcomed. "Can we keep this together?" he asked, showing the cloth to his parents. "We been the chest of beginnings," Aminata replied. They placed the cloth among old blankets and forgotten prayers. Then they closed the chest and lit a candle beside it. The flickering flame cast shadows on the wall, but none of those shadows were of doubt. They were shadows of memory. That night, Ao slept without nightmares. For the first time in weeks, he didn't cough. He didn't wake up startled. He didn't wet the bed. Has leapt whole. Because now he knew. He knew where he came from. He knew who had rejected him. But above all, he knew who had chosen him. And when the rooster crowed in the distance, announcing a new day, he was no longer just the boy from the river. He was the son of Ole and Aminata, by name and by soul, by pain and by love, by fate and by choice. Cosimu still tried to keep up. Appearances. He walked through the village in his shiny shoes, pressed clothes, and that same rehearsed smile that once charmed the naive. But the eyes no longer lied. They were tired, restless eyes of someone who knew he had built his castle on wet sand, and now the tide was coming back to collect. After the confrontation with Io, Cosimu's silence turned into isolation. He no longer showed up at the markets, avoided community meetings, and spent hours locked inside his house like a man waiting for an invisible punishment. But punishment wouldn't come with shouting. It would come with time and with the consequences of the lies he himself had sown. What he didn't know, or pretended not to, was that when he threw a life into the river, he also threw away his own soul. And fate, as silent as the hours before the rain, had already begun its rounds. It started with business. The first rumors came from outside the village. They said suppliers were calling in old debts, that the products had no clear origin, that he used false names in certain transactions, and little by little, the customers vanished. The doors of his little shop closed, and Cosimus' pride turned into rotting wood covered in dust. Then came the helpers. One by own, they left the house at the top of the hill. Some because they weren't being paid, others because they realized they were serving a man with no word. And in the end, even the most flattering neighbors pulled away like rats, abandoning a ship that was slowly sinking. Cosimu still tried to deny it, said it was just a phase, that he would come back stronger. But the truth no longer fit in his pockets, and the village, which once saw him with suspicion, now saw him with clarity. The man who had arrived on a white horse, promising progress, now walked on foot, head down, talking to himself. Then, in a gesture no one expected, he approached the village leader, asked for a chance to speak. He climbed onto the makeshift platform in the village square, took a deep breath, and began, "I've made mistakes. Many I made bad choices. Let myself be led by arrogance and vanity. And above all, I abandoned my own son." The villagers listened in silence. There were no boos, no forgiveness. "Today I have nothing. No money, no status, no peace." A deeper silence followed, but no hand was raised. No voice came to his defense. Because there are mistakes only time can digest, and wounds that even when closed still hurt. Cosimu stepped down from the platform with slumped shoulders. No one followed him. No one comforted him. In that moment, it was as if he became the living reflection of all he had planted: contempt, deceit, and cowardice. The next day he left no message, said no goodbyes. He just packed a few belongings into a simple bundle, and for the first time walked out of the village. He had tried to deceive the white horse sold weeks ago, the house on the hill given up to pay off debts. And so, the way he came, he left, but this time without disguises. Meanwhile, at the village school, workers were finishing painting a new sign. It was simple, made of dark wood with bold letters. It read, AO, Community School, Air Name, a symbol, a new beginning. AO, now recognized by all as a son of honor, walked through the school hallways with a quiet smile. He knew that tribute was more than just a gesture. It was proof that the truth, though painful, can also heal. It was the certainty that a name once thrown into the river can return engraved on a wall. Aminata watched from afar, tears in her eyes. Ole, sitting on the front bench, smiled in silence. No one had to say anything because in that small act everything was said. Justice had come, not through revenge but through harvest. And Casimir, he would still be remembered, but not for what he tried to be. Rather, for what he didn't have the courage to face. Because those who abandon lose, but those who embrace blossom. The rain arrived gently that morning, not as a storm, but as a blessing. The first drops touched the earth with tenderness, and the scent of wet clay spread through the village like a reminder that life always insists on beginning again. The school bearing Ao's name had been inaugurated 2 days earlier, and the villagers, even the oldest and most skeptical, no longer called him the River Boy, but saw him as an inseparable part of that place's story. Aminata woke up early. The fever that had knocked her down weeks ago was gone. Her body still ached here and there, as it does for those who carry life on their backs. But her heart, that beat with new lightness. In the kitchen, she was preparing. The bread Oye had eaten since he was a boy, the one made with coarse cornmeal, salt from the well, and a touch of grated ginger. It was a ritual, an act of love, a return to what had always been true. Io helped knead the dough, his hands still clumsy, but firm. His hair was growing quickly. His eyes, once full of questions, now held more certainty than doubt. As he shaped the loaves, he asked, "Can I take one of these too?" Auntie Effatun. Aminata smiled. "You can, but wrap it in a clean cloth and tell her it's a thank you for everything." Outside, Ole swept the porch. Birds pecked at the fallen grains, and life pulsed again. He looked at Ao like one looks at a plant that survived the drought, a sprout that not only endured but blossomed. And with quiet pride, he straightened his shirt and went to fetch water. In the village. The whispers had stopped. The cruel words, the rushed judgments, the crooked glances, all had been washed away by time. Yes, the truth had come. It had hurt. It had exposed wounds, but it also cleaned, reorganized, and put each thing back in its place. And now, where once there was scandal, there was respect. And where there was doubt, admiration, the boy was now registered with the farmer's name, a name that carried more than legal proof. It carried belonging. It carried a legacy of values, dignity, and character. The school gradually became a meeting point for generations. Children learned to read under the name of someone who had once almost been denied the right to exist. Ao liked to sit by the river on Sunday afternoons, not with fear, but with gratitude. He watched the waters flow, and sometimes he'd drop a dry leaf into the current just to see how far it would go. The river that almost took him was now a place of baptism and new beginnings. One day, as he and Ole were fishing in silence, the boy asked, "Do you think God let me fall in the river so I could find you?" Ole smiled, picked up a fish from the basket, and replied, "I think God knew we wouldn't find each other any other way, and sometimes the most important meetings come disguised as tragedy." The sun set slowly, reflecting on the calm waters. And there, in that simple moment, 3 destinies came together once more. The boy who was rejected, the man who chose to love, and the woman who healed her pain by embracing another life. There was no grand finale, no riches or castles, but there was something few ever find: peace. the peace of those who faced pain without turning bitter, the peace of those who loved without guarantees, the peace of someone who was saved and chose to save in return, because in the end, what saves us is not blood. It's the gesture, it's the choice, it's the love that refuses to give up. And the farmer who had nothing to do with that baby became everything he ever needed him to be. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one.